Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Future Ready Workshops, Successfully Navigating the World of Negotiations. We will be starting shortly. As part of NUS's Lifelong Learning Initiative, this series of workshops is aimed at supporting you in your lifelong learning journey and equipping you with useful workplace skills to excel in your career. Some important points to note before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be made available on NUS Alumni Relations website within a week of the event. NUS Alumni Relations and its event partners may use some or all of these images and videos in their publications, digital platforms, and/or marketing channels. For security and personal data protection purposes, participants' video and audio will be disabled. You are invited to post any question you may have throughout the session in the Q&A. Your question will be reviewed by the administrator and may be grouped with similar questions to be answered. If you require technical assistance, please message the administrator via the chat function. This evening, we are pleased to have with us Mr. Anuj Jagannathan, Chairperson of the NUS Alumni San Francisco Chapter. Mr. Jagannathan is an experienced finance professional with over 20 years of experience in dealing with teams, executives, personnel, suppliers, and customers. He is the author of Amazon bestsellers Negotiation Quotient, Opening the Door to a Successful Deal, and We Can Negotiate Too. With a keen interest in negotiation and a passion for teaching and writing, Mr. Jagannathan has hosted training sessions on negotiation around the world. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Jagannathan to begin this evening's session. Mr. Jagannathan, please.
Thank you, Althea, and thank you to the NUS overseas alumni and team that is managing this. I think that's a great opportunity for all of you to learn, like Althea said, a skill that is essential in everyday life today. And I think this is something that will benefit most of you, if not all, but this is something that we do on a day-to-day basis. Thank you for that introduction. It was a great introduction, and I appreciate the invite and the opportunity to come and speak with you and spend some time with you and share my insights on negotiations. This is something that I have realized that everybody needs. Like I said, everybody needs negotiation skills in today's life, right? I wonder why I did not learn negotiation early in my life. My first experience in structured negotiation was during my MBA at NUS. So that's where I credit to all the knowledge that I got on negotiation, and then it opened a door of opportunities for me, and I walked into that door. So whatever I'm sharing here today, I think a lot of it the credit goes to the MBA that I first realized that there is structured negotiation that I should be learning, and that can add a lot of value. I think at this point, maybe we will do a poll question to understand from you, from all of you participants, and understand from you where you stand in terms of negotiation. So we have 17% who have actually learned or read negotiation, and there are about 83 or 84%, I would say, who haven't learned negotiation before this session. So this is something that I have actually seen in my workshops. So all my workshops that I host negotiation skills, I have asked the question, how many of you have learned structured negotiation? And generally the response rate is probably even lower, maybe 1 out of 20 confirms that they have learned negotiation early in their life. So my mission was to start teaching negotiation right from the time that I came out of my MBA, and this became a keen topic of interest for me. I wanted to deep dive into the topic and then even start negotiation training. So in 2016, I started on the journey of teaching negotiation. And as Althea mentioned, along the way, in 2019, I published my first book, which is the Negotiation Quotient. It's for adults and professionals. And then my mission in 2020 was I want to be able to teach kids and young adults negotiation early in their life, because this is one skill that they would need all the way right from the time that they are growing and planning to go into college and then into their first work and so on. So they need negotiation right from the early age. And that's why I published my second book, which is We Can Negotiate Too. And that's a book for kids and young adults to, first of all, to make them aware of negotiation as an important skill. And then as they go along, maybe if they have read this book and practiced it over and over, they get better with it, and negotiation then becomes something that is just second nature and muscle memory. And then they won't have to think so much. I have many cases I have learned that people actually go into a negotiation with a little bit of concern, maybe a little bit of kind of a feeling that they are not very comfortable with. And that happens because if you haven't learned negotiation, imagine if you start driving on the road and you haven't learned driving. The feeling will obviously come where you're not when you're not comfortable, you're not happy with the situation. And that's what happens when you walk into a negotiation trying to do an intuitive trial and error method, and you actually haven't learned negotiation properly. So this is my aim and my effort to be able to teach this early in the life for kids and young adults, and then generally share my perspectives with everybody. So again, happy to be here today and share this with you. Now, something like what I'm going through here, this actually could be a long session. In MBA, this is like a 4 to 5 day course, and I teach negotiation, whatever I have here, the material, over a period of 8 hours in my workshops. So whatever I have here is probably going to be high level. And again, you can ask questions. I'll be happy to take questions. Even if we are not able to go through all the questions, happy to take some of them later. I'll be sharing my contacts. So feel free to raise your questions. And as Althea said, I think we will be able to take some of those questions as we go along. Now, first of all, I want to share with you what is negotiation. If you ask me, negotiation is an interactive exchange between two or more parties to achieve desired outcomes individually as well as on an integrative basis. So let's break this down, right? Negotiation is an interactive exchange. So we all know that in order to negotiate, we meet with the other party, interact with them. As we interact with them, we learn more about the negotiation, we learn more about the other party, we come up with more solutions, and that's where the interaction brings in solution. So the interaction is a very important part of the negotiation. What do we do in the negotiation is we try to get our desired outcomes. We all have something that we need from the negotiation. That's our desired outcome. And we're trying to get our desired outcome out of the negotiation, right? So one of the primary needs for everybody in a negotiation is to have at least an idea of what your own interests are, what your desired outcomes are. Now, in addition to having your own desired outcomes, you also need to know and understand what is the other person's desired outcome or interests in the negotiation. So what that last phrase in this definition means, individually as well as on an integrated basis, what that basically means is we should be able to not only achieve or strive to get our own desired outcomes, but also make it a win-win so that everybody is able to walk away with a good feeling of being able to get their desired outcomes in the negotiation. So we have to take care and try to achieve the interests of everyone in the negotiation. Moving forward. So in this slide, I'm going to share with you 7 insights on negotiation. These are insights that I have developed over the years. And the first thing I want to call out for you is there is a good news. And the good news is negotiation skills are completely malleable. What I mean by malleable is that these skills can be acquired easily if you put some effort into it. These skills, like any other, like communication skills for that matter, these skills actually can be acquired. So it's not as if you're born with the negotiation skills or or they are too difficult to acquire, anybody can learn negotiation. All you need is, first of all, to know a little bit more about the structured process, which we will go through later, but also keep practicing. Now, let's assume you have a PC, a very basic PC. So that basic PC can be the equivalent of what negotiation skills you actually have inherently. So we all have negotiation skills. We all negotiate on a day-to-day basis. Even though we haven't learned structured negotiation like 83% of you confirm, we know that we negotiate on a day-to-day basis. So we are negotiating based off of the very basic knowledge that we probably have gained or observed people and learn some negotiation skills. Now, if you take that PC and add a lot of extra processing, maybe memory and storage and all that, then that becomes a very strong PC. That strong PC basically is now your negotiation skills after you have added a structured process to it. So in addition, if you go and add more apps and graphics and all that to your PC, now this becomes like a supercomputer. And this is where, in addition to having a structured process, if you add things like proper behaviors and a good knowledge and application of influencing techniques, then that becomes for you the most effective and a strong negotiation ability, which will help you to navigate through all kinds of negotiations. So basically, it's your inherent and basic abilities plus a understanding of the structured process, and finally, understanding the appropriate behaviors and proper influencing techniques. And combine all of these take you through most negotiation scenarios. The next point that I want to highlight here is creativity is the key to effective solutions. So as I mentioned earlier, you walk into a negotiation, you have your desired outcomes, but negotiation becomes extremely it's successful when you are not only striving to get your own results, you also get the results for the other party. So help the other party to get what they want from the negotiation. And that comes from creating solutions, creating solutions which basically both parties need. So that's where the creativity comes in. So you have to generate those solutions, and in order to generate those solutions, you have to be creative. Now, let me share with you an example. A client wanted some parts from a supplier on day 15. So let's assume you're on January 1st, and the client wants the parts to be delivered to them on January 15th. Now, the supplier is having some challenges trying to get them to the client on January 15th. They can actually get the parts ready only by day 14. So now what happens is there's only a day. Client wants the parts, but the supplier has some challenges in getting those. So it's a situation where you now have to come up with a creative solution. So what happens is then in this case, when you're negotiating with the client, you ask the client, what are your interests? So that's where your interaction comes in, your deeper understanding of the interests of the other party. That's where this comes in. Now you say, okay, the client wants the parts on day 15 because they have to stamp it and label it in a way, in a manner that will then enable it to send it to another processing center by day 18. So you see the client gets the part, stamps it, labels it, and then sends it to the processing center by day 18. Now, if you knew all this through your interaction with the client, you can actually come up with a solution and say, okay, I can get the part ready by day 14. If we work out an understanding and you give me all the information that you need to be stamped and labeled, I can do it for you and I can ship it by the day 18. So in fact, I could probably even ship it by a day earlier. Maybe if I ship it from my end on day 14, it might reach you or the processing center on day 17. So now you have effectively, based on your interactions and negotiation, you have effectively created a solution where both parties are happy. The supplier gets the time that they need, the client and the processing center, they get all the parts on time, maybe even earlier, and everybody walks away happy with the outcome. Next on this is negotiation is not war. So what basically this means is negotiation is not all about winning. In some of my workshops, when I have asked the question, what is negotiation? Mostly people do say it's about win-win or compromise or trying to get to a solution that everybody benefits from. Yes, of course. But then some people have actually said it's something that where you have to prove a point. Or sometimes then people have actually gone to the extent and said it's to win the negotiation. I would say negotiation is not a war. You don't have to win every negotiation. What you need to do, like I said earlier, is partner, understand what is the other party's interest and partner with them and make it a win-win. So it's not about just you winning, but it's also about everybody winning. The next insight is price is almost never the main criteria. And the word almost is important here. So you might, and by price, I'm tagging that, I'm using the word price a bit loosely. It could mean a salary, it could mean a price of a product, or it could mean anything which is quantifiable. But basically, that should never be the final criteria. Your criteria should be, again, like I said earlier, to understand everybody's interest, to come up with solutions. That is the main criteria. In some cases, the price might be important. For example, there's a type of approach to negotiation which is called distributive approach. Distributive approach means that you have your position and all you want is to reach to a stage where you get your position. So let's take a very simple example. You're trying to sell your car in the market, a used car, a second-hand car, and you have a price in mind. At that stage, all you need is for you to get the price. You're not looking to build a relationship. You're not looking to create solutions or anything like that. Maybe the main part of that is price. So in some of those cases, in a distributive negotiation, price might be important. But in general, price is never the final criteria. It is the interaction, the relationship building, and everything else that goes along that to make that negotiation successful. Okay, the next is walk away is also a solution. So many of you think that if you walk into a negotiation, you have to come out with some kind of a result. There are situations where you actually might not get a solution right away. You have to probably put in some more work. You maybe need a break. You need to walk out and or walk away in some cases, and that might actually be a good solution. Now, what happens in a walk away situation is that if you have alternatives that you have created, and we will come to alternatives later, if in your mind you have created some alternatives to the negotiation because you have anticipated that negotiation might result in a walkaway, then when the actual walkaway happens, you then rely and fall back on your alternatives. And if you have strong alternatives, that might be one of the better results of the negotiation. So the next one here is negotiation is being human. So like I mentioned earlier, building relationships and creating those having those proper behaviors and showing courtesy and having cordial understanding. These are all very important in a negotiation. So it's not about only to the point transaction-based approach to a negotiation. It is also important to have that human feeling, to have the partnership, have the collaboration. That's one of the main criteria that makes negotiation successful. Now, if you know, in many communities or in many societies, negotiation also is probably, if you walk into a negotiation, it's probably the second aspect of the negotiation is to talk about business. The first aspect always is relationship building. And this is in many cultures. You actually first go in, start talking, building relationships, and then only once you have built relationship, then walk into the actual or start discussing the actual business. So again, it's being human. And finally, negotiation is a combo, super combo of different subjects. So what I mean is, when you're negotiating, it's not only about negotiating that you're talking. It's a combination of several different topics, and you probably need to be aware of a little bit at least of different topics such as psychology, economics, leadership, organizational behavior, law in some cases is important. So all of these topics play into your negotiation abilities. So what I want to highlight is the structured approach that I keep talking about to negotiation. I call it the balance of negotiation. And what this basically means is it is a structured process, which you can see on the top, the three phases here that you see on the top. Yeah, these three are the structured process. And then they are complemented and adequately supported by behaviors and techniques. So your process, which is very important, along with your appropriate behaviors and effective use of techniques, influencing techniques, is what makes your negotiations successful. It is important to strike the right balance and the blend of the process as well as the behaviors and techniques. Now, the process here on the top, the three phases, I call that the science of negotiation. So the science of negotiation has to be complemented and supported by the art of negotiation, which is the behaviors and techniques. So, like I said, it's the right blend and the proper balance between the science and the art, and that's what makes the balance of negotiation successful. Now, moving on, let's talk a little bit about the process and the three phases. So the first phase is prepare. This is an extremely important process in your or step in your negotiation. And why is this important? Is because, like I said earlier, if you walk into a negotiation and you're not sure what you want, you haven't prepared, it's more of a trial and error or an intuitive method of negotiation. You actually don't know what is the expected result, either for yourself or the other party. That's where negotiations are more likely to fail. Now, Benjamin Franklin said, failing to prepare is preparing for failure, right? So if you don't prepare, if you don't know exactly all the steps that you need to take in the negotiation, all the things that you want to address, your own interest, the other party's interest, all those things, then you're never going to be able to come up with creative solutions, which basically means that it's not effective. The results are not effective in a negotiation. So prepare phase is extremely important. Now, what does prepare phase include? The first part of prepare phase that I want to highlight is the CAV framework. Now, CAV framework basically means it's a framework where you are preparing, and in order to prepare, you're highlighting all the important things that you can present to the other party in the negotiation. So let's look at what the CAV framework is. The first part of the CAV framework is competency. So what this says is, if you walk into a negotiation, you actually need to know what is your competency. What do you have to offer to the other party, or what is your idea, and why is that idea so great? Is this idea actually has some benefits to the other party, or your product has these features and benefits? So you have to be able to explain what is your competency, what is your product, what is your idea, and how it benefits the other party. So that is the competency, the C part of the CAV framework. The next is the A, which is ability. So what is ability? Ability is your unique aspect. or your unique ability to deliver the product, or something that is unique in your idea. So, so there might be two parties with the same competency, for example, but what would make the two parties different is their unique ability to deliver that competency. So if you have a company that manufactures a product, there might be another competitor who does the same thing, but based on their unique abilities, one company might be able to do it better than the other, and that's what is highlighted by the A, which is the ability. And then last is the value. So again, you might have great competency, you might have unique abilities, but what makes it even more better, so even better, is value you provide to the customer. So in addition to having a great competency and ability, if you can provide extra benefits, if you can provide extra value, that's where it makes it a very strong case for you and for your product or your idea to succeed in the negotiation. So what I'm trying to highlight here is before you even think about walking into the negotiation, you should have your own CAV framework properly analyzed and assessed. And that will give you the confidence to walk into the negotiation, to be able to say, this is what I offer, and this is why this is great for you, right? Let's do an example and see what this basically means. So let's explore the CAV framework for Google search, for example, right? We all use Google search on a day-to-day basis. So what does the CAV framework look like for Google? So if you look at the competency, Google is a search engine that makes the world's information accessible for all of us. We know that. It gives us answer to any questions that we have, and we know that. And then in a blink of an eye. So the results are so quick that that makes the competency great, right? So those are that's the benefit. So we get information very quickly and exactly what we need. Now, what happens is the ability basically is something unique that Google has. So for example, Google knows and suggests. So as soon as you start typing, because of their database and all the information that they have stored and all the millions and billions of searches that have been done on Google, they actually know and then can suggest what you want. Even if you make a mistake, Google will change it for you, right? Because the algorithm knows exactly what you're trying to look for. It's a one-stop view for everything. You search for something, it gives you a whole lot of information on the side, which is basically maybe Wikipedia information or maybe additional information, website, contact information, all that comes immediately based on what you're searching. So it becomes a one-stop view for you. Google has a PageRank algorithm, and I'm not sure if you're aware that Google is actually accessing millions of websites around the world for you to get you the data that you need. And they have all this information analyzed in their algorithm. The algorithm browses through all this information, and based on the credibility of the information and the number of people who have accessed it and so on, they're able to ascertain which information is most valuable and then provide that to you. And then Google also has a talkback feature. So if in case of accessibility, you also have the ability to talk back. So these are some unique abilities that make Google better. So we all use Google for some reason, and that could be the unique abilities. Now, in addition to having a great competency here, and in addition to having a unique ability, Google actually can provide some additional value to the users. And in this case, the additional value comes from having the best results actually because of everything that they have stored in their servers, but also things like the Google Search Navigator. That's an extension that you can download. The Google Alerts. So I don't know how many of you have used Google Alerts, but it is something that you can go and schedule. So if you want to search for, let's say, a specific term, for example, maybe kids negotiation, you can go and schedule alerts for kids negotiation. And then on a day-to-day basis, you get emails on relevant topics or relevant search results related to kids at the negotiation, and they are delivered to you on your email. So it's like scheduling a report in a system, and the report reaches your email. It's similar to that. So as you can see, what is happening here is Google is giving you something extra, more value, right? So with this kind of extra value, Google is able to say, okay, now my product is much stronger than any of the other competitors. So, and then Google Assistant, we all know that we can we can get Google Assistant information. So if we are on our devices like phones or tablets, we can actually set up Google Assistant, and the Google Assistant will give us information related to a search term that we have searched for. So these are all different things that Google has done to give you that extra value. So let's move on. Assessing interest. Now, this is a very, very key topic. If there's something that you can take away today from this, is the focus on interests in a negotiation. So don't focus on positions. And positions meaning, let's take the example of a mother and daughter. And the mother wants the daughter to go for swimming classes, but the daughter doesn't want to go for swimming classes. So the positions basically are, you have to go to a class, or I don't want to go to a class. Those are their positions. Now you have to, if you only talk about positions, for example, no, you have to go, or I don't want to go, it's not going to result in anything meaningful, right? It might not be effective, might not be satisfactory result, and could also, and in many cases, it harms relationships also. What you have to focus is the interests of the parties. So why does the mother want the daughter to go for swimming classes? So it could be things like you'll be able to have fun with your friends. When we go on vacation, you can enjoy. It's also life skill that you need to get. So these are all the different interests that the mother has. And the daughter might have her own interest for her position of not going. It could be the fact that maybe she doesn't like to swim with a crowd or a lot of people. She also feels that the water is deep and maybe cold. So there are different reasons and interests, underlying interests behind her position. So what happens is then in this case, both parties, mother and daughter, have to discuss how to attend or address the interests of both parties, so that then the result could be finally meaningful and effective for both parties. So it's like creating solutions for mutual gain, thinking creatively, as I mentioned earlier also, and then building or enhancing a longer term relationship. Now, this is a very simple cartoon. I don't want to go over it, but you can see what that is saying is at the end, they come up with a creative solution and get some meaningful results or useful results. Now, I want to highlight a story. I don't know how many of you have heard this one, but it's a very classic orange story. Now, this is a story where there are two sisters, and both of the sisters want the last remaining orange. Now, if both are arguing over the orange, what is going to happen is at some point it's going to be a stalemate. So they're not going to be able to come to a proper conclusion and result. So mother comes along and says, okay, both of you want the orange, I'm going to split it in half and give it to each one of you, and that's it. So that's the result. Now, would you think, or would you agree that that's a good result? Many of us would say, yes, that's fair, because both of them got half of the orange, right? Now, actually, it is not. And the reason for that is, if the mother had spent some more time to understand what are their underlying interests behind that, getting that orange, it could have been a much better solution and a much better result. And that is because in this case, one of the daughters wanted the orange because she wanted the peel, the rind for baking a cake. And the other obviously wanted the fruit. So if the mother came along and asked and assessed what the interests are, she would have been able to give the full peel to one and the full orange to the other one. So that would have been the win-win situation that we strive for in a negotiation. Okay, let's move on. A discussion about alternatives. So a concept that I want to highlight is reservation price. Reservation price basically means it is the base result or the base option that you have in a negotiation. So for example, let's say assume I'm selling my car, and again, this is a US specific example. I know selling cars is not that much of a easy topic in Singapore, for example. But anyway, so I'm selling a car, second-hand car to somebody. My base price is, let's say, $10,000. Anything below $10,000 is going to be a walkaway for me, because I cannot accept anything less than $10,000. So that's my reservation price. That's the base option. So we all need to know our reservation price in a negotiation, because anything that is less than that reservation price is adverse for us. And if we do anything, if we accept anything that is less than that reservation price, it's going to be a harm to us. So we need to know what that reservation price is. But at the same time, we also need to know what our train is. What is train? It's the top ranked alternative in negotiations. This is similar to a concept of BATNA that was introduced in the book Getting to Yes. And what that says is, when you walk into a negotiation, you need to develop alternatives, strong alternatives, and you need to list down all the alternatives, and based on those alternatives, you then need to go and identify which one of those alternatives is your top alternative. So that's your train. If you have a strong alternative, that's your fallback option. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have a walk away situation in the negotiation, at least you can fall back on your alternative, meaning you then can rely on the alternative, and that makes at least your result a little bit more satisfactory, because you had a strong alternative and you were able to go back to it. So developing alternatives is very important. You also should be able to learn about the other party's alternatives. Maybe at the time of preparing, just understand or analyze what the other party's alternatives could be. You might not have all the information at that stage. That's where the engage phase comes in, and you can get all the information there. So if you look at this on this side here on the right, this is a understanding of what is the success and impact in a negotiation. Now, if you look at the bottom left, the no deal basically means, oh, it's a walkaway situation. So if it's a walkaway situation and you haven't had a good alternative in mind, it is low in impact and it is no success. So that's why it is in this quadrant here. On the right here in the bottom right, you have the reservation price. Basically means that you went into negotiation, you had a reservation price identified, and all you got was the reservation price, right? In this case, at least there was some success in the negotiation because you got something out of it. But then the impact is again low because you got only the reservation price and nothing more than that. On the top left is the train. And basically the train here is highlighting the fact that you did not get any success out of the negotiation. So the negotiation did not result in any meaningful result or did not create any meaningful result. But then what happened was you were able to go back to your train. And if you had a strong alternative, which is the train, then at least you have a high impact. So it's a situation where you still feel a little bit satisfactory that you have a strong train and you can fall back on that. And then finally, the situation where it is a high impact and a success is where you walk into a negotiation and you get much more than what you had anticipated in terms of the reservation price. So that's when it becomes a successful negotiation. Okay, so let's move on. Types of negotiations. I think we all know that there are some standard types of negotiation, like the two-party negotiation, intergroup or intragroup. So you have a group. Within the group, you negotiate its intragroup, and you do that so that you can get to some kind of an agreement within the group. Or you have two groups, that's intergroup, you negotiate between the groups. Then you have multi-party negotiations, you have coalitions. These are all different types of negotiations. But the one I want to highlight is click-through negotiation. And I think this is something that you might not have heard anywhere. In these days and the times that we are in, I think we have something called click-through negotiation, where you are negotiating with an algorithm on the other side. So you are sitting on this side and negotiating online. And this happens a lot these days when, for example, you're shopping on Amazon or any of the other e-commerce sites, or you're booking travel on Expedia or any of the other sites. What you're doing is negotiating with the other, with the algorithm, with the other, with on the other side, uh, with the program. So basically, what is happening is you say, I want to book a ticket from X to Y, and the system tells you, okay, these are all the different prices based on different times. So the system is basically asking you, what are your interests, what time do you want to travel, and based on those times the system then gives you the algorithm then gives you different prices based on the times. And then what happens is it also offers you, so these are creative solutions. Basically, if the system then offers you things like bundles. So if you combine your air ticket with hotel, then you get this much price or something better, and so on. And then they might also give you maybe some points and whatever. So that's extra value in the CAV framework. So basically, just by sitting on the other side of the computer, you're able to negotiate all these. And this is something that is becoming very critical and important these days. So I will stop here, see if there are any questions that we need to take. Karen is saying, is there any element of compromise in negotiations? Does compromise then leave one and or both parties feel less than ideal, and the desired outcomes may not be complete? So that's a great question. We can come to that. I'll hold on to that thought, and when we come to the styles, we will discuss a little bit of that. There is one more question here. Can we practice it at home, not against family members necessarily, but we use it in the wider context, whether at work or friendship? So negotiation actually can be practiced at home, at work, anywhere. This is something that we do on a day-to-day basis. Even if you're on a phone with a friend and there is something happening, a decision that has to be made, you are negotiating because you're discussing what the alternatives are, coming up with some solutions, and so on. So it is something that actually happens on a day-to-day basis. Can you explain a bit more on whether negotiation is more about the relationship or the price? What happens in situations where it's purely based on cost, and in others where cost is important, but the relationship may also be important? So, like I mentioned earlier, in most situations, negotiation is a little bit beyond just the price. So I also highlighted to you that there is something called distributive negotiation, where it could be maybe just the price that matters, but then in many other situations, I think I would focus largely on relationship building, on assessing interest and all that in order to get the effective results from the negotiation. Can please share examples of successful negotiations against client and bosses? So I mean, there could be many such situations. I don't know how or what kind of situations you're looking for as an example, but there could be a situation where, let's say, a boss is negotiating with the manager in the team on maybe reducing or eliminating headcount, for that matter, right? So there are situations like that. These are practical examples that happen, and the manager has to then come up with their analysis, their reasons, and all the different work that they have done to be able to justify more headcount or keep the headcount at the level that they have, and then have that interaction with the boss and so on. So that is a very common example that most of us face on a day-to-day basis, where we have to negotiate. And I think that's where what it is important to, first of all, understand each other's interests, but at the same time come up with proper preparation. So your analysis and everything has to be solid to be able to prove what you are trying to say. So then you get a good result from the negotiation. I think we'll probably stop here and then come back to questions towards the end. Let's move on. And the next thing I want to highlight, next phase I want to highlight is engage phase. So like I mentioned, prepare phase is extremely important. Prepare phase is where you do most of the analysis and get the information ready. But then you move on to engage phase where you actually interact with the other party. So you can imagine that this is also going to be an extremely important phase in the process, because now all that you have done to prepare yourself has to be delivered, right? And when I say delivered, that's where you go and engage, talk to the other party. A lot of things happen during the engagement. You come up with solutions, you talk to the other party, maybe they have some ideas, and you bring all those ideas on table and come up with a final result. So engage phase then becomes crucial in the negotiation. Let's look at a few concepts in the engage phase. So interaction, first of all, interactions is where you actually sit with the other party. Now, you might have identified your interest and the other party's interests, but then when you sit across the table, this is where you build on the interests. So based on the discussions that you're having, now you understand what their interests are, and you can actually then build on your interests also. And once you have a deeper understanding of the interest, that's where you then finally come up with the best solutions for a mutual win-win situation. So for example, the mother and daughter example on swimming, they might not have known the interest, but only when they started interacting and engaging, that's when they understood the interests of each other. And once they understood the interests of each other, then they could come up with a solution. Now, alternatives, you might have created your own train, your own alternatives, but there might be situations that you learn during the negotiation and you might have to tweak your alternatives. Or you might even understand a little bit more about the other party, and you might understand what their alternatives look like. So that's why it is very important during the interaction to confirm the alternatives and just build on the alternatives that you have. Now, during interactions, it is very important. The conduct is extremely important, which basically means that behaviors matter a lot in the interaction phase and or in the engage phase. So how you behave, how you communicate, your body language, your emotions, and all those things that are part of the behaviors will play a key role in the negotiation. In many cases, the behaviors, if they are not adequate or appropriate, can actually break the deal and kill the negotiation. So very important to have the right behaviors. We'll look at a little bit of that in the slide. And then characteristics. So some characteristics that are important are spontaneity, which basically means quick decision making. It is very important because now you have prepared, but you go into negotiation. Now you actually start building on whatever you have prepared. In order to build, you need quick decision making. Persistence is very important. So you don't accept, for example, something as no as an answer, but you keep discussing more, creating more solutions, but at the same time keep discussing more so that you can keep you can keep the discussion going, so that then you learn more and tweak your solutions based on what you're learning. So if you just accept an answer as no and then not do anything with it, it is not going to result in anything effective. But if you persist, keep asking more, maybe generate more information, and then come up with solutions, that might help you. Now, in many cases, there might be the other party doesn't want to ask or understand anymore and doesn't want to talk. Then at that time, it also looks like the negotiation is going to fail because the behaviors are not appropriate. Flexibility is another characteristic that is very important. You need to be flexible. You need to be able to quickly change and uh, and be able to deliver something of meaning and value to the other party, and that's where flexibility comes in. Courage. So the courage to ask is very important. A lot of us think, okay, if the other party has said no, again, this is something related to persistence, but if the other party has said no, maybe we don't have an option. So, or in many cases, if I ask for something, um, it might feel awkward, or it might not be good for me. So I don't want to ask. That kind of situation is addressed by this courage. So having the courage to ask is very important. And then finally, neg optimism. This is something I developed. What this means is you walk into a negotiation with optimism, but at the same time, what you have to do is not only optimism in terms of positivity and trying to get a positive result, but also keeping your biases aside. So let's assume you're working with a certain function in your organization, or with somebody in that you know, and you have some prior experiences. Keep those prior experiences aside and walk into the negotiation with optimism and positivity. If you bring the bias into the discussion, it is more likely that you will fail. So every situation is different. The preparation might be different, and you might be able to use better behaviors and techniques to make that negotiation successful. So keep the biases outside. Okay, let's move on. Framing. Framing is something that is important for you to note. Is if you frame something as a positive or as a gain to the other party, it is more likely to result in a good response from the other party. So the other party will be more accepting if you show something as a potential gain, whereas if something is a potential loss, then they become more like demanding and might even walk away. So always when you frame something, it is important to frame it as a potential gain. Now, there's also a concept called perceptual contrast, or high value, low value. Basically, what this means is when you're framing something, or when you're presenting something, you present it such that if there is a high value item, you can also sell some low value. This is again something that is used a lot in sales. It's a way of framing where you present something with a high value, let's say a car. Along with the car, you sell some maybe some warranty or accessories, whatever it is, which is of low value. Because once you have a higher value, the low value items in front of that high value seem to be more uh, easily accessible, and the buyer is more likely to accept that, and you show that as a potential gain, that these are low value items as a part of the whole transaction. And then the other one that is used in high value, low value is basically in a series of like in a bunch of transactions. If most of them are low value, you plant a high value transaction there. The high value item, what the effect it has is it makes all the low value items seem reasonable. This is again something that is commonly used by marketers or by sales, and that gets a result, because then you see that there is a positive impact in the mind that is created. Is okay, all these are low value and I don't want the high value item, I just want to go with the low value item, and basically the low value items are what people want to sell. So these are all different ways of using the framing and providing that to the other party. Okay, let's move on to anchoring. Anchoring is extremely important. I think most of you might have heard about this in maybe some way or the other. What anchoring means is, first of all, you need to derive an anchor. An anchor is your starting point in a negotiation. So if, for example, you're selling something and you put in a price first, that first price is your anchor. And it is during the prepare phase when you have to actually derive your anchors. So you need to know what are the best anchors for me during the derive phase, during the prepare phase. So you derive those anchors at that time. Now, how do you derive anchors? Is you have to derive anchors based on facts, circumstances, or any other justifiable reasons. So it cannot be just an anchor that you have picked out of thin air. It has to have a proper justifiable reason to derive at that anchor, because the other person might ask you the reason for the anchor, and if they ask you the reason and you don't have a reason, then you're more likely to lose trust, and your anchor might not be useful anyways because you're not able to justify it. Now, once you have derived the anchor in the prepare phase, the engage phase is where you actually then go and deliver the anchor. So now that you're sitting across the table with the other party, you deliver the anchor. So you put in your first price, and once you have put in the anchor, based on the discussions and the various outcomes that are discussed in that session, in that engagement phase, then you can make adjustments to your anchor and come up with the final price. So you have your anchor, the other party will have their anchors. You discuss based on the anchors and then come to a price. So so the engage phase then in that case becomes very important. And again, it is very important that you have your anchors identified. The other party might ask you during the engage phase, what is the basis of your anchor? So you have to have proper reasons why you have your anchor. And beware of adjustment of anchors. So you should not make your adjustment of anchors so fluid and volatile that you're adjusting your anchor not in a proper structured way, but in a very unstructured manner. And by doing that, the other party doesn't know what your actual price is. For example, if you start off with 100 and your first adjustment is $90, then your next adjustment is 70. Now this is going to totally confuse the other party because you went from 100 to 90, but then from 90 to 70. Now the other party doesn't know what is the actual price. It could be much lower than 70 also. So your adjustments should be lower and lower. So for example, from 100 to 90, 90 to maybe 85, 85 to 82, whatever that is, the adjustments of the anchor should be lower and lower. Okay, so moving on, close phase. Again, prepare and engage phase did all the work for you, but at the same time, if you don't close something properly, it is of no use. So all your efforts you have spent in preparing and engaging will be of no use and will be a wasted effort if you don't close the negotiation properly. So for example, there are three parts of this close phase, which is agreement. So you come to a mutual agreement of all the terms and conditions based on your interaction. You also obtain any necessary approvals during the agreement part of the step of this close phase. So you might need maybe 3 or 4 additional approvals. You get all of those during agreement. Then you record all of the commitments, the terms and conditions on paper. And by paper, I mean maybe on an email or a contract or whatever it is. The terms and conditions are all recorded. And once you have recorded that, then the final handshake happens. Handshake basically means either you sign a contract or you confirm on an email. Now, at the time of handshake, what you also need to discuss is, are there any specific communication aspects? For example, do we need to do a press release, or do we need to communicate to the board or something like that? And those things might be important, because if you haven't done one of those steps, then your whole negotiation effort might not be meaningful, because one of the steps which was important has been missed out. So you need to know all these different types of all the aspects that you need to take into account when you are closing the negotiation. So I had heard this in one of the seminars I attended: nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which basically means until you have the agreement, the record, and then the handshake, your negotiation is still incomplete. So only when you finally do the handshake, that's when it becomes complete. Okay, let's move on to behaviors. And behaviors, basically, like I mentioned, I think I've highlighted this a lot over the past hour, is trust and credibility is extremely important in a negotiation. So you earn respect at the table, and that actually makes your negotiation easier for you, and also at the same time more meaningful when you earn that respect. So you know what you're bringing. The CAV framework is important here because highlighting the CAV framework basically tells the other party that, yeah, you have done your homework, you exactly know what it is, how it benefits the other party, and that's where you earn respect at the table. Developing relationships, I mentioned this earlier, is very important. Focusing on balancing their needs with ours is again one of the key requirements, and then be flexible. So I mentioned flexibility earlier. Then the next here is communication. So I touched upon communication also. If you don't communicate properly, then you're more likely in the engage phase to walk away because you might not get all the results you want because of the failure in communication. So be a good listener, come up with uh, open-ended questions so that you know exactly what the other party wants. Only when you come up with open-ended questions will you understand what their interests are. Ask for clarification or examples, and have the courage to ask. I think we talked about the courage to ask. So all these are important in the communication. And then emotions, very important in a negotiation. Again, I mentioned this earlier. Your body language, your ability to understand what the other culture means. So there are different signs, there are different actions in some cultures which mean something, and all that can be derived and understood from the body language. So you need to understand and focus on the body language. Confidence is very important in a negotiation, because if you're not confident, the other party can easily say that. And once you show a low confidence, that's where you're more likely to fail in the negotiation. Be considerate to their feelings. Again, this is very important in a negotiation for the trust and credibility, and also to move forward. And then avoid hostility. So hostility, we all know, is never successful or never useful in a negotiation. So if you want the negotiation to be effective, you have to keep the hostility or your emotions in check and keep that aside. Okay, moving forward, two considerations which are extremely important in a negotiation. One is culture and one is style. So I briefly mentioned about culture earlier, is where you understand what the other culture means. You understand a little bit more about actions in the culture and so on. That understanding is critical. You need to understand the impact of culture even during the process. While you're preparing, you need to know in this culture what is important, what are the specific aspects you need to consider, and that is where your cultural inclination comes in, and we'll look at that more in the slide. And then the next one is styles. I mentioned styles earlier as a part of the answering one of the questions, and we'll look at the styles also. So moving on to culture first. Culture is very important. The culture inclination basically means is your ability to understand and react and respond to the cultural aspects of the other party. So there are a few different types of cultures. One is the country culture. Every country has a certain culture. Then there is a society culture. So within the country, there might be a society culture that is important. Then if you're talking to an organization, there could be organizational culture, meaning that within that organization, there is a specific culture. And that organization's leader or the team that you're working with, the leader has a different culture. So all these things are very important. Some of these things are easily available, like you probably know what the country culture and society culture is, but some you might have to really work on. For example, you need to understand what the organizational culture is. This is where relationship building matters, because you can talk to somebody and understand what the culture is, or for that matter, the leader. You can try to understand what the leader's culture is, and by doing that, you actually know how to cater to that. So cultural inclination is very important. Again, this is a topic that actually can go into a full 1 hour or more discussion. So I'm keeping it high level here. What you need to do to build cultural inclination is, first of all, understand the culture of the other party. What are the specific aspects of culture that could impact the negotiation? Respect cultural differences. So there might be differences that will impact the behaviors, their behaviors, yours. So you have to understand those cultural differences and also respect them. Be aware of how people perceive your culture. So if you know something about their culture, they also probably think something about your culture, and it is very important to know what they think, or at least be aware of what they might think, and then not to fall in a stereotype. So just be just be normal and take into account all the effective behaviors, and that's where the other party will then feel more reasonable and comfortable in the negotiation. And then finally, identify the best approach, uh, keeping those cultural boundaries in consideration. So that's what you do in culture. Again, there's a lot more that happens in order to understand the national culture or country culture. There's also a study that has been done, which is called Globe Study. You can probably Google it, and you'll get a lot of information on Globe Study. What that does is it tells you what are the different countries and how they behave and so on, based on 9 different dimensions. So this is something that might be interesting for you. When I teach my full workshop, I highlight all the different dimensions and what is important in that dimension and how it affects your understanding of the culture. So this is something you can probably Google and find out. The next is the negotiation styles. So these are 5 different styles: collaborating, compromising, accommodating, competing, and avoiding. So collaborating is win-win. So you and the other party both go into, say, if both are collaborating style, you go into the negotiation with a win-win in mind. So you collaborate, you partner, you come up with all the solutions that are required as a team. Compromising is where I win some, but I'm actually okay to lose some. And I think there was one question earlier: is it okay to compromise? In some cases, your nature and your style leads you into compromising. In other cases, it might actually be that the compromise is okay, because if you don't compromise, you might have all the effort that you have put in, and that might go to waste because you have reached so close to the final decision that the compromise might help you might take you across the finish line, and that is where a compromise might be okay. But then keep in mind that the compromise should not adversely affect you, and you in some cases, instead of compromise, you can probably walk away if it's going to adversely affect you. Accommodating actually means that you focus more on building relationship, and you choose to lose in order for the other person to win, because you want to build relationships. Competing is where I win and you lose, so that's the competing nature of the style. And then the final style is avoiding, where I lose and you lose because we cannot. There's maybe confrontation or a conflict, and I don't want to make any decisions, so I walk away. So avoiding is that kind of a style. Now, as you can see here on the side here on the right, collaborating is the best. Compromising and accommodating probably are the next best in terms of devising solutions as well as nurturing relationships. Maybe accommodating is even better than compromising for nurturing relationships. That's why it's on the side here. But in terms of devising solutions, they might be probably equal. Then competing is not great for nurturing relationships, and avoiding is not at all great because you're not making any effort. So that's the worst kind of situation. Moving forward, let's understand these a little bit more. Again, collaborating, I mentioned, is mutual gains is the objective, focus on all interests. Competing is where you want to get your own will, focus on your own interests, and use some hardball tactics to get your own will. Avoiding is where you have a direct, to the point interaction. You want to leave difficult conversations aside. You don't want to go into any confrontation, and then more likely to walk away. Compromising is where the objective is to share with others. So you are more likely to come to the middle ground. You believe in reciprocation. So you give me some, I give you some, and that kind of style. And then accommodating is where you focus more on relationships, higher EQ. You want the other party to be happy and so on. So that's where you accommodate and give them more than what you should. There are many people in this kind of style. Again, styles actually could be a whole topic for an hour that I generally teach in my workshop. So this is high level. Now coming to the common pitfalls in negotiation behaviors. So what happens in behaviors is engaging with the other party in the negotiation. Building trust is important. If you don't do that, then your negotiation is going to fail. Uh, Failing to make an effort to understand the other party's views is very important. That has to be considered. Communication is important. Paying little attention to the culture and not addressing the cultural impacts or cultural considerations is going to fail your negotiation. And then not understanding the style of the other party or your own style, it's another issue that can break your negotiation. So these are some of the common pitfalls in the behaviors. So moving on, we have techniques. So this is the final part, and I want to highlight what these techniques are. Basically, what these techniques are, these are persuading or influencing tools. So you use an influencing technique and immediately it results in some kind of a response from the other party. Now, we often use these, but we don't realize that we're using them, or people actually use them, use these techniques and persuading means on us, and they are trying to get something from us, and we don't realize that this is a technique that they're using. So it is very important to understand some of these techniques and also understand how they are used, because then you know what's happening. There could be multiple techniques that apply to one particular scenario, and that's why you need to know what technique to use or which is the best in that scenario. These are subtle. So like I mentioned, when you use these persuading techniques, the mind creates an immediate response or a reaction to those techniques. And that's why these are subtle. As soon as you apply that technique, there's an expected reaction to it. And we will see more in the next slide. And then the extent of influencing techniques could vary by situation, by culture, by levels. So for example, if you're negotiating with an executive, the influencing technique that you could apply would be different from an influencing technique or a persuading technique that you apply for maybe a lower level like a project team member or somebody. So an executive might have a different technique and project team member has a different technique. So things like that. And also by culture, these could vary. Now, what you have to know is at the end, we are dealing with people. So it's all about people. And when you talk to people, some of these influencing techniques are useful in being able to persuade them. And in a negotiation, that's what brings you to the finish line, is when you are able to persuade and influence them towards a decision. Now, some of these techniques, what I have categorized these into three big buckets. The first one is connecting. There are three types of connecting techniques. One is reciprocation. Second is bonding, references. What happens in reciprocation is that it's a give and take. So I give you some, you give me some. So when you give somebody something, then you expected, or you expect that you will get something back, and the other party has the same view, is we do give and take. So reciprocation is very important in that sense. If you also make a concession, the other party is then kind of obligated to make that concession for you also. So it's reciprocation in a concession. Then you have bonding. Bonding is where you build relationship. So I've talked a lot about relationship. That's a technique. You continue to build relationship. You nurture relationship. You show proper empathy. These are all ways for you to create bonding, and bonding can result in good results, in meaningful bonding can bring good results for you. And then finally, references. References is where you're talking to party A, but you bring in a different party, like maybe party C, to influence as a reference, influence the party A. So references can be used like that. Even there could be references maybe of part like a previous situation or any other association that you know. So there are many different ways you could use references. Again, I want to highlight that at this point it's high level because this is techniques is one more area that I could spend more than an hour on, but this is at high level. I'm trying to explain this, so keeping this more informational for you. And these techniques, once you know what these techniques are, you can probably read up a little bit more and understand what these techniques are, and then maybe start using them. The next category is committing. Committing basically has two techniques: promise and vested. Promise basically means you get a promise from the other party to do something, and then that is an obligation for the other party to keep up that promise. Similarly, if you have made a promise to the other party and you're obligated to keep up that promise. In some cultures, it might not be as strong, but in many other cultures, the promise is very strong. So it actually can then become an influencing technique. If you have got a promise from somebody, then they have to fulfill that promise. Vested is a slightly different version of a promise where you have a multi-party negotiation, and in order to get to a final result, you talk to all of the parties offline separately, get all of them bought into the idea or the final result. And once all of them buy in and all of them are aligned, then what happens is your final decision is much more easier because you have got all of them agreed. So this happens a lot in rule making, like creating policies, creating rules, is you talk to a lot of different parties in the process, talk to all of them. Once they all agree, then the final rule is, or the final policy is implemented easily because now everybody has agreed to it. So that's vested. And then finally, you have the controlling techniques. Controlling is three techniques here: authority, loss anxiety, and vividness. This is something that has the impact of controlling the other person's mind, or having something that immediately impacts the other person's mind. So for example, authority. How is authority used is maybe it's an authority of some facts, or authority of law, or authority of title and power. So when you bring in the authority in your negotiation and you want to persuade the other party, the authority has an impact and gives you the leverage in the negotiation. So you can bring in the authority to influence the other party. Loss anxiety is something very common. We all use it a lot. Is we bring in the element of loss. So if you don't react immediately, you will lose this. Or if you don't buy it now, the price will be gone, or price will be increased, and so on. So these are all loss anxiety methods. And then vividness, I mentioned to you earlier in the engage phase about framing positively. Vividness is a slight tweak of the framing where you present something so extraordinarily, which basically means that it has an immediate impact on the other person's mind because it has been shown so extraordinarily, and that actually results or leads the other party to make a decision in positively, so in your favor, because it has been shown so vividly and so extraordinarily. So all of these techniques, what they are doing, as you can see, is when you apply the technique, they immediately trigger a certain kind of reaction, and that reaction might be a good reaction for you. So I think that is the end of these techniques. Now, what are the common pitfalls in a negotiation is you don't follow a proper process. That's a pitfall. You don't understand your own interest or the other party's interests. You don't pay attention to proper behaviors. You don't focus on the special attributes like the characteristics I talked about, like courage to ask or persistency and all those. And then you don't understand the influencing techniques. For example, if you don't understand how these influencing techniques are applied, it might be a pitfall. And the final thing that I want to highlight here, which is important, is if you don't learn from negotiation, if you have gone through a negotiation, but then you don't learn anything, you think that, okay, it's only a one time, and you don't prepare your notes and then move forward. Next time you have a negotiation, might be a slightly different way, but if you haven't learned anything from your previous negotiation, you're again going to go into an intuitive or trial and error negotiation method. So it is very important with every negotiation for you to keep, either make a mental note or keep a diary and note how the situation has gone and how you can improve upon it. So that's all I have for today. I think we went through the three phases. We looked about this. We looked at the behavior, the culture, style, and the influencing techniques. And all you need is practice and practice. So one of the questions was, can we practice at home? Yeah, you can practice at home. You can practice with your friends. You can practice at work. You can do it anywhere. And I want to highlight to you that I mentioned to you, even I didn't have proper negotiation or structured negotiation for most of my life. But then at some point, I understood the importance of this topic and I started diving deeper into it. And that's where I understood, okay, this is important. And I started learning it. And along the way, I learned so much just by observing, by learning, and it helped me a lot in my life. So you can also do it. And that's it for today. Thank you so much. And these are my contact details. If you have anything you want to reach out to me for, any questions, anything, I'm actually contactable on all these different means. And again, don't feel shy. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you in any manner. So maybe with that, should we go to a few questions? So here we have one which says, how do we handle deadlock negotiation or tough, difficult case where each one aren't willing to move their position? So now what happens in those cases is you could actually create some or generate some creative solutions which might make the other party change their mind. I can give you a quick example. We were in a class where of course the one party is the professor, and the professor actually we were in a negotiation with the professor, and we were trying to say, Professor, can you reduce the final allocation to the final exam and give us more allocation for maybe group work or class cases and so on. And the professor could not do it because, of course, there are some regulations and university rules and all that the professor cannot change the final allocation. But there is also a solution that can be created is based on the discussion with the professor. We are able to identify that the final exam can be the same, will be the same allocation, same number of points, but then you can take the exam in groups of 3. And if you create a situation like a solution like that, what happens is then you are in a better position because now you can take the exam in groups of 3 and you don't have to just do it by yourself. And that creates maybe more meaningful results for you. So in a deadlock situation, you can try to create solutions. But now if this party doesn't want to entertain any solutions, then you are in a situation where maybe walk away is the only option if they are not entertaining any creative solutions. So you have to, and that's why I mentioned earlier, is walk away could be a solution in some cases. You have to be prepared for that kind of situation, and you need to have alternatives in mind. Can you share your view on how to negotiate with people like Donald Trump? Okay, this can actually go into a full 1-hour conversation, but there are many situations where you can negotiate with people like that. With people who tend to focus on the competing and techniques. So people who have the competing technique, how you can deal with them is, again, try to create some meaningful solutions, give them an opportunity to understand that they might be benefiting from something, but at the same time, all they actually want to know is how are they going to benefit. So that's some of the techniques that you can build in, or strategies that you can build in to give them what they need, but at the same time, try to build some solutions for yourself. Again, it's a question that I can discuss a lot about, but we don't have time here. And Kenneth, you'll have to stop me when I should stop at my end here.
You can just go ahead first. I'll probably later.
Okay. How do you establish the relationship so quickly? Might only meet for a few times or via a phone call. So I'll tell you a story. I was discussing a policy that we were trying to implement with a business partner. And this business partner was known to be not very cooperative or not very friendly. For some reason, that was the bias. So like I mentioned to you, in those situations, you keep your biases aside. I walked into the discussion about the policy with this business partner in a very positive frame of mind. What I did was some research on the business partner. um, Maybe I looked up on LinkedIn to see what they have done and maybe what they would like to hear as in the part of the relationship building. So once I knew what they had done, I looked up LinkedIn profile and I knew that this person also had an NUS MBA. So my first discussion as we started was about the NUS MBA and the fact that I'm also an MBA. This created an association, so bonding due to association. Once we discussed NUS MBA for about 5 minutes in that meeting, it all came down to having that common association and good relationship. Just within those 5 minutes, I was able to create that relationship based on the bonding. And surprisingly for me, I had no issues with that business partner. I went through the whole policy. He understood every part of it. I addressed his questions, and then we moved forward. So even with 5 minutes, if you have done your homework and you have done everything that you need to understand what the party has done and what are the associations and so on, you can build a relationship that way.
Thank you, Mr. Jagannathan, for the useful tips and for helping us to become better negotiators. Mr. Jagannathan is based in San Francisco, so we are especially grateful for his willingness to conduct this webinar, even though it is now about 5 a.m. where he is. A big thank you too to all our participants for joining us today. We hope that you have enjoyed the session and, more importantly, learned something useful. Do like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and subscribe to our WhatsApp broadcasts to stay informed of upcoming alumni events and latest updates. We will be ending the session in about 5 minutes. Thank you for your support and good night.